Carl called each of the contacts he had written down, but all he got was rejection after rejection. As he crossed out each number on the list, Carl began to lose hope. He looked down at his notepad and there was just one number left. This is it, Carl thought to himself with a sigh, and then he called the number. Carl woke up one morning feeling down, and he wished he could spend the whole day in bed, but he knew his mom wouldn't let that happen. So instead, he decided to spend some time browsing social media. That was where he went whenever he wanted to get lost and forget all his troubles. He wasn't expecting to see graduation photos of his childhood friend, Alex. This made Carl both happy and sad because he and Alex had been more than classmates. They had been best friends as well. On his way to work, Carl was strolling through the park and thinking about his life. While most of his school friends were graduating from universities and getting jobs in big firms, Carl was still living in his mother's apartment and was stuck in a job he didn't like. It wasn't always like this. Carl once had a bright academic future, but everything changed after that one day. Carl had just been promoted to the next class with good grades, and he was eager to share the good news with his mom. When he got home, Carl immediately told his mom the good news and she was so proud of him. But the next class wasn't what Carl had expected. Carl suddenly found himself struggling to catch up academically. The teacher thought the subjects were too difficult for him to grasp, and as time went on, Carl's performance only became worse. Worried that something was wrong, Carl's mom took him to the hospital where the doctor diagnosed him with dyslexia. Completing high school was a struggle as Carl's academic performance continued to drop. In the end, Carl had managed to finish high school, but his grades were so low that he couldn't find admission into any good university. Frustrated, Carl exhaled. He had been so lost in thought, and he realized that he was going to be late for work. When Carl arrived at work, the manager was furious at him and gave him a strict warning, insisting that Carl would be fired if he repeated this again. Carl wasn't bothered. He was done with the job anyway, but he only lacked the courage to resign because he didn't know what else to do with his life if he resigned. Carl had become a loner ever since he graduated from high school and his best friend Alex left for college. Despite his mom's advice to get a social life and make friends, Carl preferred to stay indoors, watching TV or browsing the internet when he had nothing else to do. But today, Carl didn't do any of that. Instead, when he finished work, Carl went back home and laid on his bed. He was depressed, not because he envied his friend, but because he felt his life had no meaning and he was simply wasting it. When his mom got back home, she was surprised that she didn't see Carl in the living room watching TV or playing his video games as usual. So she went to his room to check up on him and ask him how his day went. "Did something happen at work?" Carl's mom asked. "No, my best friend, Alex. He graduated from university," Carl replied. His mom understood how he felt and encouraged him to not feel bad, but instead to try to find something that would interest him. After eating his dinner, Carl went for a walk to clear his mind. He had to do something about his life, he thought. He wasn't just going to admit defeat. But Carl didn't know where to start. He couldn't get a good education, and that restricted him from getting a well-paying job. After thinking for a while, he had an idea. Carl's boss had casually mentioned that he wanted to change the logo of the cafe, but he was struggling to come up with a great logo design. Carl thought that he could make some samples and present them to his boss. Once he arrived home, he spent all evening working on some designs, and he really enjoyed the process as well. The next day, Carl gave a design he had drafted out. "You're a gifted kid," his boss exclaimed. "I really like it." Eventually, Carl's designs became the official logo of the cafe. Carl hadn't thought much about doing something with his design skills, but right now, he felt inspired. Carl knew there was plenty of competition out there, and to increase his chances, he decided to take an online course on graphic design and become certified. Carl searched and soon found a suitable online school for graphic designers, and he immediately enrolled in the school. Carl was happy. He had finally taken a huge step forward and was determined to see it through. He discussed his plans with his mom, and she liked the idea. She wondered why she hadn't thought of it before, since Carl had always shown an interest in drawing as a child. However, as time went on, Carl's enthusiasm soon waned, and he found himself back where he started. Carl was struggling to complete the course notes and fell behind in the assignments. Deterred by his performance, once again, Carl decided to stop his classes. He felt there was no need to try again, since he'd always struggle with learning. One late afternoon, Carl was just closing for the day when a customer walked in. It felt like a dream, but standing in front of him was his childhood friend, Alex. Carl lowered his head, feeling ashamed and wishing the earth could swallow him up. "Carl, is that you?" Alex said as if he wasn't so sure. "Hey Alex, you're right, it's me." Alex and Carl chatted for a while, and Carl told his friend what had happened after high school and how he was unable to get admission into any of the good universities because of his grades. Alex felt sorry for his friend, and after giving him his business card, Alex told Carl to call him if he needed anything. Carl was grateful and thanked Alex. On his way home, Carl took a different route. He wanted to walk for some time while he thought. He was embarrassed to meet Alex because Carl hadn't achieved anything in his life. He wanted to change this, but Carl had exhausted his options. He raised his hand and looked at the business card Alex had given to him, and that's when something caught his eyes. It was the logo of the company Alex worked with. He recalled when Alex said he had to intern in the company before he was fully accepted. When he got home, Carl searched online for marketing companies that he could intern with and wrote down the contacts of each company on his notepad. Carl called each of the contacts he had written down, but all he got was rejection after rejection. As he crossed out each number on the list, Carl began to lose hope. He looked down at his notepad, and there was just one number left. "This is it," Carl thought to himself with a sigh, and then he called the number. Unfortunately, nobody answered his call. That evening, Carl was silent at dinner. His mom tried to encourage him, but with no success. The following day, Carl was woken up by a phone call. The company that didn't pick up the phone was now returning the call. The man mentioned that the salary for interns is very low, but the opportunity to prove himself is there. Carl instantly agreed because all he needed was opportunity. The same day, he informed his boss that this would be his last week of work. And the following week, Carl started his new job as an intern. Carl's supervisor saw his dedication and passion, and soon he gave Carl more and more opportunities. And Carl didn't disappoint. Soon, Carl was handling big projects, and many of the other interns came to him for help. Carl didn't waste his time anymore, but now in the evenings when he got home, he would often be learning new things. His mom was very proud of him because she could see that this job was something that Carl was good at, and he also enjoyed it. Towards the end of the internship, Carl found out that he would have to prepare a presentation. This really got Carl worried, as Carl wasn't good at presentations. But despite that, he wanted the job, so he tried to put in extra work to prepare for it. The presentation didn't go as well as planned, and Carl was struggling. This really upset him, and he thought that it would probably hold him back from getting a position in the company. Later that day, Carl was called in by his supervisor, and when he got there, Carl found out that he was one of 3 people that were selected and offered a job in the company. He couldn't wait to get home, so he instantly called his mom to tell her the news, and she was happy for her son. Carl smiled. He was glad he never gave up, and although it had been a struggle, he held on to the hope that his life wasn't meaningless, and eventually, it paid off.